5, just a moment. We'll then have our 3 speakers for the presentation style of 10 or 15 minutes each. Then a moderate conversation from myself. At that point, we will have questions from the nexus of climate security is something that has grown in importance past decades. And it's one that has been very long. It's one that is relevant for the next generation. So we do have a lot of students here. Our urge is to make sure that the key elements, that is the concern of those who are under 30, IMD, climate disasters, is addressed, is recognized by those of you and institutions that absorb them, make sure that the connection between all the various neighborhoods strong. So with that, I would like to ask Mathieu to join us. He's director at the NATO Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence. He joined Canada's Department of National Defence in 2004, held a range of roles across defence and policy, operational planning, and international security, including serving as defense counselor at Canada's Joint Delegation to NATO HQ from 2020 to 2020. His experience spans bilateral and multilateral defense issues, as well as outreach and strategic coordination, giving him a particularly strong perspective on how climate security is being integrated into alliance states. As director of the CCASCOE, he has helped lead NATO's efforts to strengthening understanding, collaboration, and practical responses around the security issues of climate change. Mathieu, you can rise.
Hello. I can do whatever. Robert, thank you very much. It has been along the way. All right, thank you very much. It's quite a pleasure to be here in Toronto. It's actually our first event in Toronto. We're doing the corporate setup of the center for the last 3 years. We're certainly hoping to be here to add an event in cooperation with the NATO Association. And it's fascinating. I think also being the royal Canadian welcome. Thank you very much for coming here. I won't take much of your time because, as Robert said, I think we have nice line of experts that will be able to talk us through the different issues. But I wanted to maybe give you a little bit of a sense of where NATO is from. The climate change, specifically climate security, is not necessarily a new topic of discussion in the general public. Certainly not in the academic think tanks. It is fairly new at NATO. I have to say that for the last 10 years, capacity and expertise has been building and feeding on the greater represented by the civic society and private endeavors. But a long way has been covered, and what I can say from my perspective, both being at Russell's HQ, being the director of NATO, is that a lot of knowledge is capacity to better understand, not necessarily climate change, climate security, the whole spectrum of things, but specifically when it comes to climate change and climate security spectrum goes from a whole range of impacts on either food security, water security, migration, governance, and the likes. But when it comes to really the military power, what they're really focused at center of excellence is the impact of climate goals on the things that matter to ensure operational effectiveness and operational success. It comes first to the individuals. What is the impact of the changing climate on the soldier, what is the impact of the climate on medical services? And then it goes to natural. What is the impact of changing temperatures on the other platforms? And the most cited example is fixed wings, which produce, a warmer climate really impacts your. So that's the kind of questions that we would like to experiment. And then finally, the impact on infrastructure. And I think maybe this is where most of the progress we've seen a lot of their infrastructures, a lot of money invested, a lot of need in diverting different sources of energy to power civil infrastructures, but also investing in renovating and protecting infrastructures. It's changing lives. You see it all over the world, and obviously, the ones that are in the best example so far are the most institutions, which are led by so CCASCOE obviously does not do that stuff, or I think our public friendship about this first. But we are literally people who are working with a whole range of stakeholders on a wide range of products. This goes from research, which Christian will talk about a bit, but also on training and education courses. For hosting our second course on this course in week. 5 days where people from across the alliance, but also across the world, discuss not only the challenges of climate change itself, but also the decision-making process that is so important for improve. And then we are also supporting the and the ones. So it is quite astonishing that this is the rest of as being put together in Montreal. What's more astonishing from my perspective, after 2 years of the album, this is the amount of goodwill and cooperation that there is in that sector. And it ranges from fintechs to the academics to the private industry to government institutions and international institutions. There's a lot of very competent people that are working hard to make sure that this issue, which, to be honest, certainly they're fun, that these days stays at the top of the agenda of this group. Now, I'm sure that you will probably do the round of applause after this, but I think you should give a round of applause to yourselves as well, because being here and learning about these issues is our more rewarding. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm sure this should work now. Thank you so much, Mathieu. I'm pleased to introduce Francesco Silvara, MP of Vaughan Woodbridge for 2015 to 2025. He's been an extremely strong member on the NATO Parliamentary Association for those years. For those of you who are not aware, the Parliamentary Association makes sure that our members of Parliament are aware of what NATO is doing, get to visit various NATO installations, and to create meaningful relationships with various members from our allied nations. So with that, a very short introduction, Francesco, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Robert, thank you for the kind invitation. It worked out fortuitously today that I'm just up at the Bachman School of Management doing the Institute for Corporate Directors course, so I could Uber it down and then Uber it quickly back before they ask, where the heck am I? Just a comment on the 10 years of being in Parliament. I still remember my first NATO P8 trip to Brussels, pre-COVID. And the hotel we were staying at, some gentleman by the name of VP Mike Pence was in the hotel working out in the gym while I was working out, or I should say pretending to work out. Maybe that was me, not him. But it's been it was a great period of my life and a lot of fun memories. And as an MP, one of your jobs is, I think, a big job is to participate in those associations. I was chair of Canada Europe for many years, and going over and visiting our transatlantic partners was always something I look very much forward to. On to my formal remarks, and one thing I'll say, it's great to see so many young people here. I don't consider myself young anymore. I have young kids, but it's great to see the youth that are participating in this association because we need their involvement. And we need them to shape their minds, but we also need them to become influencers to shape other folks' mind how important transatlantic links are. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, fellow policymakers, defense experts, and friends. Thank you to the NATO Association and NATO Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence, CASCOE, for inviting me to deliver this keynote. It's an honor to be here in Toronto today. We're here because climate change is no longer just an environmental issue. It is a strategic, economic, and security reality, one that is already shaping how Canada and the Alliance think about resilience and operations. In fact, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization made this explicit in its 2022 strategic concept, formally recognizing climate change as a defining challenge for Allied security. I would say it remains a challenge, uh, in addition to everything else that is going on in the world. That matters because it signals that this is no longer a side conversation. It is central to how we plan, invest, and operate. As oceans rise, Arctic ice melts at nearly 4 times the global average, and extreme weather intensifies across Canada. Our military isn't just responding to crisis, it is adapting to fundamentally a different operating environment. Today, I want to make the case that understanding and responding to these impacts is not optional. It is essential to maintaining the operational effectiveness, and I want to highlight the role of COSCO, based in Montreal, in helping NATO allies and partners do exactly that. Let's start with the stakes. Climate change is a threat multiplier. It amplifies existing risks, from infrastructure vulnerability to supply chain disruption, and it intersects directly with geopolitical competition, as we know and as we see in the Arctic. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Arctic. As ice recedes, new shipping routes and access to natural resources are emerging, alongside increased strategic interest from Russia and China. For Canada, this raises real questions about sovereignty, infrastructure readiness, and our ability to operate effectively in a rapidly changing region. And we all know the recent announcements by the federal government, which pertain to the Arctic. Without adaptation, our capabilities are strained. With adaptation, we strengthen resilience and deterrence. The Secretary General's annual 2025 report drives this home. NATO's new 5% GDP defense investment plan, with 3.5% on core capabilities and 1.5% on resilience, infrastructure, innovation, earmarks billions for these risks. Canada's CREST strategy echoes, focusing on science and technology for mitigation, risk assessment, Arctic hardening adaptation. The Greening Government strategy mandates net zero federal operations by 2050, including national security fleets. I'd like to add, I had the privilege of traveling with the former Prime Minister to Washington, I think just before the November elections. And when we were in the room with the senators and various elected officials in the United States, they very much hammered on the point of the 2% target. And I remember that trip quite well with Minister Joe Lee as the foreign minister at that time, and the prime minister, and how we spoke about hitting the 2% target, whether it was realistic or not realistic, whether we could do it. But the feedback from the U.S. senators in those meetings was very, very clear that they anticipated and expected us to hit those targets. These aren't nice to haves. They are force multipliers. A resilient D&D and CAF remains operationally effective, even in the face of melting permafrost and more extreme weather. But this is also where economics meets defense. Ignoring climate risk does not just impact operation; it impacts competitiveness. I spent 2 decades in global finance at JP Morgan and Scotiabank in New York City and in Toronto before entering public life. What I saw there was simple. Markets reward preparedness and penalize delay. Carbon pricing, particularly industrial carbon pricing, is something I've defended as a cornerstone of Canada's pan-Canadian framework. It isn't about punishment, it's about price discovery. By 2022, it helped signal roughly 30 megatons of avoided emissions while driving investment into clean technologies and keeping Canada competitive. Clean fuel regulations, which I supported through committee work in natural resources, are helping decarbonize transportation through renewable diesel and advanced biofuels without undermining industry. That's why collaboration across sectors matters. It's what earned recognition from the Canadian Fuels Association in 2023, and it's what continues to drive practical progress. Actually, Robert, the CFA actually wanted me a trophy, which I still have at home for being a proponent of the industry. They're a great bunch of folks. When we look ahead, hydrogen stands out, particularly for heavy defense logistics. It offers a pathway that is clean, scalable, and made in Canada. Now let me turn to CCASCOE. Established in Montreal, the NATO Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence is not simply another institution. It is a platform for coordination, research, and practical solution. Its mandate is clear: to support NATO allies and partners in adapting to climate-related security risks, mitigating their own environmental impact, and strengthening operational effectiveness. This last sentence, I think, is very, very important because it doesn't change despite the environment we're in, and despite the daily news articles we may read, particularly about our neighbors to the south. But institutions alone are not enough. One of NATO's greatest strengths has always been its ability to bring together a broader ecosystem, not just government, but organizations to help shape understanding and engagement. And this is where the NATO Association of Canada plays an important role. Many Canadians have the privilege of not having to think about security every day. The NATO Association helps bridge that gap by raising awareness about how security connects to daily life. I don't think NATO's been mentioned so much in the last year versus the last 10 years, and also but it's important. There's a clear parallel with climate change. Its effects are widespread, but its connection to security is not always immediately visible, but it is there. By engaging communities, hosting discussions, and building public understanding, organizations like NAOC act as force multipliers. They strengthen the broader ecosystem, supporting initiatives like CCASCOE. Multilateral and collaborative approaches, whether through NATO itself or through centers of excellence, are some of our most effective tools for addressing complex challenges like climate change. They allow us to share best practices, align standards, and respond collectively, because no single country can do this alone. Let me bring this to something personal. As a father, I think about the kind of world we're preparing for the next generation. Climate change is not just a policy issue, it is an intergenerational one. That is why engagement and education are so important. Personally, I do have 3 daughters at home, so I do think about their futures quite often. Because the decisions we make today will shape both our security environment and our economic resilience for decades to come. So what does this mean in practical terms? First, we continue to invest in resilience as a core part of defense planning. Second, we strengthen collaboration across NATO allies, partners, and organizations like NAOC to help connect policy to the public, which today is very, very important, cannot be understated. Third, we prioritize innovation, from clean energy to advancing forecasting tools where climate and technology intersect to strengthen operational effectiveness. And finally, we continue to educate, because informed societies are more resilient societies. And we know in today's world, with much misinformation or disinformation, having an informed society is critically important. Canada's role in hosting CCASCOE reflects, not CCASCOE, reflects leadership. As an Arctic nation, as a NATO ally, and as a NATO country with strong capabilities in clean innovation, we are well positioned to contribute meaningfully to this work. And as we all know, the federal government announced we have met our 2% NATO targets and continue as such. Climate change is not a distance challenge. It is here. It is shaping our strategic environment, particularly in the Arctic area. And how we respond will define the strength, resilience, and security of our alliance moving forward. Thank you. Thank you for responding to the issue of climate change. Robert, thank you for the kind invitation. I wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. I do need to return to the course I'm at, but I look forward to coming back to the NATO Association of Canada.
The panel to join us up front. Lieutenant Colonel Christian Sealand, Colonel Mike Vermillion, Professor Elizabeth Gillette. An absolute pleasure. Just turn this on. I really appreciate Francesco Silvara's points. He's been part of the community for a long time. He has helped to engage many young voices, and I really like that response. And those who are part of our community more generally. NATO Association's goal is to make sure that those aren't already invested and interested in defense become invested and interested. It really is something that is part of every aspect of our lives, whether it is our education, our social services, our health, everyday occurrences, going to coffee with friends, going to a show, whatever it might be, using our infrastructure and expecting that it will be safe. That is part of defense and security. It's just that it's invisible when you're enjoying it. I think that's extremely important. And that's why I'm so thrilled and so proud that NATO has always been an organization that seeks to bring in a larger community, to make sure that those who may have doubt about larger institutions, with good reason, institutions can get voted and we have lines of something. The whole idea of our institution is to move us through an organized and capable group. NATO is one of the greatest aspects and examples of such an institution. The best way, if it is ever going in the wrong direction, or if it needs to be course corrected, things like the Center of Excellence for Climate Change and Security can help it do so. There is no greater strength than collaborative work to make real change in the world. While protest is important, one of the perhaps greater ways that we can make change is by being part of an institution and bending towards that other vision or that new vision, which we are always going to have as a society. And it is that constant discussion that we're here to address today when it comes to climate security and how to address it when it comes to the present day. So thrilled the Center of Excellence has chosen to really help to explain what it is, why it's important, and to make sure that our Toronto community is aware. It's really a thrilling moment for us. So thank you again to so we will have 3 presentations to start off, and then a conversation moderated by myself, followed by open floor. And we're happy for critiquing voices, discussions. We will take this moment though to mark founding or questions and make sure that they are to a point. It's not just a statement, it's something that are. So Christian will start with you. Lieutenant Colonel Christian Sealand is a research and analyst officer at the NATO Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence, where his work contributes to NATO's growing efforts to understand and to respond to security implications of climate change. With a background in meteorology, climatology, and defense analysis, he brings both scientific expertise and institutional insight to the conversation. His perspective is especially valuable in showing how climate change is not just an environmental issue, but one that increasingly shapes military readiness, resilience, and the broader operating environment of the alliance. Christian, over to you.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here with this distinguished panelist. I have also a presentation I would like to take you through. Uh, who will help me with the presentation? Or I don't want to touch anything. Please just perfect. Thank you so much. So, as Matthew introduced CASCOE, I would like to take you further into our business model and to give you a flavor of what we are doing in Montreal, and especially how we made progress since the accreditation and so far. What you see in the picture is our location in Montreal, in the Old Port area. When you have time and you will be over there, please visit us. As previous speakers mentioned about climate change and security, we face a lot of challenges, especially nowadays. But how NATO is addressing that? It's easy, and it's already mentioned in the as we call them, NATO Climate Change and Security Action Plan, which is based on 4 pillars: awareness, adaptation, mitigation, and outreach. Based on these 4 pillars, CASCOE was built, and our branches are or ensure that they will deliver on all 4 pillars of NATO Climate Change and Security Action Plan. How our journey started, as I mentioned, it started in 2021 with the action plan. One of the action items of that plan was to build a climate change and security action, a center of excellence, which happened in 2022 when Canada proposed to host the center with Montreal selected as the host city. Then, 1 year later, in 2023, 12 NATO allies signed a founding document for CASCOE at the NATO summit in Vilnius. 1 year later, at the Washington summit, we received our accreditation. So last year, 2025, was the first year of full operational capability. To give you a short of understanding of how a COE is working, and also to understand the geographical distributions of them, I would like to start by saying that CASCOE is the first center of excellence in Canada, and the second one in North America, as we have 30 more centers of excellence across Europe. Our vision is that we would or we are pursuing to become an international recognized hub of expertise on climate change and security for military and civilian experts and decision makers. The key projects that we worked in the last year, and also they are on our program for this year. As you see on the slide, it's a very high focus on the Arctic region, and I will brief you shortly about our achievement on this project, as I'm the leading person of this project. Then we have the work that will be completed next year, and we will help like command transformation on operational concept on climate change and security. Then we are working in the same time on the Sentinel project, where basically we would like to build up a one-stop shop for climate data and security databases, articles, peer review, analysis, policy documents that are curated and ready to be used by different stakeholders. Then we have a close look on war game development. At this moment, we are developing 2 war games, one in Sahel and one in the Arctic. Then we have the fellowship and internship program. And I take advantage now to announce that the fellowship program for 2026 just opened last week, and it will so for the applications, and it will be open till end of this month. And also another in-house project is the climate change and security courses. This year we are building 3 courses. The first one will start next week. It will be a basic course on climate change and security. It will be held in Montreal, but we are looking for another 2 courses this year, one in Italy and one in Germany. Also, I would like to mention one of other major project that we are working on is Montreal Climate Security Summit. This year will be in mid-October, and it will be focused on climate smart investments on the road to 5%, as it was mentioning that the defense spending will increase in the upcoming years. Then also I would like to invite you to join our community of practice as CASCOE is leading this. We so far we were been able to attract around 200, 300 practitioners on climate security domain, and we are doing regular meetings. We are presenting our products, but also people from the community of practice are invited to present their activities. Also, we just finalized a podcast series. We have publications, and also we have on our website just released a glossary on climate change and security. Now I would like to turn to the second part of the presentation, which is to give you a flavor on what we did in or under Arctic project, especially last year, but also we are continuing this year. The main or the heart of the project is what we call Arctic climate paradox. As we all know, Arctic is warming, but this warming is coming with a cost. Even we speak about infrastructure that is built on permafrost that is going, or even if we speak about increased extreme weather events that affect navigability or some other aspect that are as a direct consequence of climate change, we put this under a signature concept that is called Arctic climate paradox. Then we look into different timelines, and it was surprising to see that these timelines are aligned in a way that we don't see that this will or this alignment will occur in the or after 2030. So we call this the decision window. Is a window in which NATO should act. Otherwise, we will not have the same opportunities as they are unfold in the next 4 years. And I will take you very fast through all 5 timelines. So the first one is we documented that if we speak about infrastructure project, we need at least 5 to 7 years from design to full operational capability. And if we speak about the Arctic, this timeline can even go up to 10 years. So if we start now, the first results will be visible not less than 2023, 2035. And then we documented the allied procurement cycle, and all of them cannot be realized with or below 7 years. Most of them are going all the way to 10, 11 years. And I would like to mention here the 2 major polar icebreaker acquisitions. The American one will be finalized by 2030, and the Canadian one is expected to be finalized by 2032. And then we have the climate trajectory, who is adding compound costs to whatever we might have there or we might build on. And then we have the ground force vacancy of Russia Federation, as most of the ground forces were moved to or deployed to support Ukraine invasion. now we have a ground force that is, we see that is depleted, and it's not more than 20% of the initial or the pre-levels before the invasion. But if the war in Ukraine will end soon, they need around 3 to 5 years to refill those ground force that are vacant at this moment. But also, it's very important that this timeline aligns very well with the NATO defense planning cycle, as next year we will start to write the political guidance, and that will be followed by capability targets, which will shape the NATO investment all the way to 2040. Also, we are trying to cluster all the information, all the theoretical analysis under some signature concepts that will never, or they were never used in this way when it's about Arctic climate change and security. And I would like to briefly mention a couple of them. So we looked into environmental protection as a mission assurance, as you know, because we all deal with defense. Environmental protection most of the time, or in conventional analysis, is the opposing force to operational capabilities. Or gains in one side can add cost to the other one. But we see that in the Arctic, we need to treat environmental protection as part of mission assurance. And why is that? Because most of the infrastructure is built on permafrost, so we need to protect the permafrost. Also, all the supply chains rely on the infrastructure that is built on coastline. So also we need to consider to protect the coastline. And also vegetation is very important, as is presenting a protective layer for the permafrost. Another signature concept is the Arctic inspection factor. We see that everything in the Arctic needs to be multiplied with a factor or with a factor. Even we speak about mobility, even we speak about medical evacuation, maintenance intervals, so on. Then we look into Arctic deterrence by resilience. We see that in order to have a good posture in the high north, we need to be resilient. So for that, we need to be sure that our infrastructure is resilient or is not affected by permafrost thawing. Also, we look into diversify the energy sources in the high north. Also, we look into fill the gap that we see in the domain or in the domain awareness and communication infrastructure. Then I would like to also to speak about Arctic climate change as shaping force. As you heard before, most of the time when we speak about climate change, we refer to that as a threat multiplier. But in the high north and Arctic, we see that that is the main force that is really going to affect you. So you need to find climate change in Arctic in the Arctic rather than treat climate change as a threat multiplier. These are some data that we built our assessments around. I will not insist on them. And I will conclude my presentation here, and I will let the other speakers to take it from here. Thank you.
From a general understanding of what the Center of Excellence does, and various human access have, really does remind you of kinds of conversations access can have on various parts of society. Now, Matthew can't say this, Christian can't say this, but I can mention it. The NATO Association has really recognized how much considerations of how military implications of climate change are affecting those who are not leading climate change. Those who don't lead climate change, who think it's exaggerated, usually will be the same kind of people who will listen to Pentagon, for instance, or for those who are looking at defense and security It's really an important part of their lives, part of their understandings. So the fact that NATO and various other militaries are taking climate change as not only a serious element in operations, but as something that must be studied and taken into consideration for every operation. It's something that I find extremely useful and very forward-looking aspect of defense. From now, we will move on to water security, which as Canadians is of great interest to us, of course. Colonel Mike Vermillion will be giving us a little bit of a sense of some of his work at the Global Water Security Center. Mike, you're welcome to either sit or stand. Colonel Mike Vermillion is a retired U.S. Air Force officer and the director of the Global Water Security Center at the Alabama Water Institute. His work focuses on the relationship between environmental pressures, particularly water insecurity and national security, with an emphasis on how these issues affect stability, infrastructure, and defense planning. Drawing on both military experience and applied research, he brings a practical perspective to climate security, one that connects environmental change to the real operational and strategic challenges facing defense institutions today. Mike, really thrilled to hear what you say.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Casco, and Jen for inviting me. So a little bit of background, a little bit more than what Robert said, just to get a grounding. I was in the Air Force for 27 years as a weather and climate officer. And I was one of the dudes, of course, you don't get credit for it because usually the Secretary of Defense signs off on it. Ghost author, if you will, of a lot of the documents that have been running around for many years now. I was one of the chief architects of writing a lot of those documents for the United States military and the Department of Defense at the time, now Department of War. In 2020, I was asked to take off my uniform to stand up the center that I'm going to talk about. It's called Global Water Security Center. I needed to be smarter than the politicians of which I needed to help. And so if I had to put the word climate in there, then things would have been bad. So I'm smarter than them. I knew that way in advance. So we are the Global Water Security Center, and I will explain how that all plays out with environmental security or climate security here in a second. So one of the things, as I was in the military, that I was frustrated with is the bureaucracy didn't let me do the things that I needed to. If you've ever served in a government of capacity in any fashion, you're told what to do, how to do it, and pound sand if you don't do it. So I was able to take my uniform off, and we created this framework, because we needed to have the strategic foresight. And so Penny's around here somewhere. She's leaning up against the wall. She helped develop this framework that I'm going to talk about this one briefly. And I'm not going to go into super details, but on the left-hand side is the biophysical, the floods, the droughts, those kinds of things that you begin to see how climate begins to affect you. And what does it impact? Is it infrastructures? And then the secondary impacts of health or many other things. And then there becomes this point of the biophysical, that there's this inflection point where the instability can either be good and have opportunities, or it can spin out of control and go into instability. And so in the top side of this, when we do our analysis, we look for those opportunities, the good things that could come out of it. We're not just focusing on the negative, that it's going to spin out of control and become a conflict or war or instability, but we look at some of those social conditions and the governance and what actors are playing in, and then try to articulate to the people that we provide information to, hey, this is an opportunity to put our thumb on the scale and look for those opportunities to make a difference. Sometimes it's in development work, sometimes it's foreign military sales, whatever it may be. But we need to look for the positive sides instead. But traditionally, we as humans, we look at the negative side. And so this pathway also looks at where there are opportunities for instability. Where are those grievances? What actors? Is it ISIS-K? Is it Boko Haram? What are the ones that interacting with the environment on the left-hand side, the biophysical stuff? We've all heard the stories in Syria and Lake Chad and many of these other things. But can we anticipate this? Can we have strategic foresight? Can we look at our crystal balls and not get caught by surprise? we're a very reactionary society, the military is too. And so how can we use the data to begin to articulate where do we need to look for things to make a difference? So in this framework, we look for all these many opportunities to intervene. Could we do adaptation way early in the left? Yes. Do we have enough money to do all that? No. So then what are some of the other things as we begin to go from left to right? Where can we identify these different areas and make a difference? And that's what my center does every day to try to help the Department of War and State Department and I call it the former artist known as USAID, and some of these other things to begin to understand how all these begin to work. So Jennifer asked me when I came up here, hey, can you give some examples? So the one in blue, I can't name the installation, so you have to just because the government says I can't release it. But the question on installations, and Christian mentioned it earlier. Hey, we're beginning to put up. We have all this land and military installations. We're going to put data centers on it. Well, like, okay, and by the way, it's in a desert, and the reason they're putting it there is cheap power and cheap and land. They forget about the water aspect. So I'm just going to plop a data center that uses lots of gallons per minute and suck up all the water. And they had no idea that there was a water security issue. You're taking from the local community and pulling all this water for all these AI data centers. And water, time and time again, kind of gets forgotten in this. But then the droughts and the mega droughts and all those other things that affect society and being able to operate, yeah, they kind of ignored that fact. And so we made the point of telling them that, hey, probably not a good idea to where you're siding these. The next three I'll talk about, the ones in red, but these kind of give you the flavor of the different kinds of questions we get from the intelligence community and others on it. The top one, now they're reconsidering particularly putting an installation or some of these data centers on this installation, not to affect the local communities. That's kind of the outcome. Again, we spend a lot of time educating folks, letting them know things that should come normal and think the commanders. I mean, I'm the 06. I mean, a colonel. You'd think that I would. And yes, I did not have a lobotomy when I got up to that rank. But sometimes they forget these things, and it just or they don't have the time to understand. And so an organization like mine takes the data, takes the science, and translates that over to these decision makers. They don't have time to read these projects or understand them to fully. Yet they're making multi-billion, trillion-dollar decisions without fully having the knowledge. And so we take a lot of time in our center to try to educate them. So this particular one was a shorter term one. Gabon, in particular, this was AFRICOM asking us, hey, will Gabon, they want to become a regional power for electricity for West Africa. And that's great to have plans, but do they have enough water to do that? You know, or are they just going to spend lots of money on dams, put themselves in a hole financially, and then can't hardly produce anything? Or you tick off the neighbors down the stream because they're holding back all the water and they don't get any of the water. So we were particularly asked on this particular one, hey, do they have the ability and does the future weather and climate going to support it? Is it going to go into a massive drought in the next 10, 15, 20 years? You know, we see a lot of times they build these dams in good times of lots of water. They don't look in that strategic foresight and go 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Are we going to have enough water to run through these turbines? We see that all over the world all the time. And so this was particular, the answer is yes. The future climate scenarios that are out there, it looks like it would support Gabon being this regional power. And so it's not just going to be this false hope that they're trying to do. This one, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, this is more of the shorter term thing. That was a longer term, 2035, 2040. This is a shorter term where lots in the news. Egyptians are really upset at the Ethiopians. I was texting with Beth right before we walked up here. This one probably is the biggest issue, probably in Africa right now. Egypt says that the Ethiopians are taking their water
But if you look at the diagram down there in the bottom, it's sorry, it's yellow. I should have thought about that before I put it up there. But Lake Nasser never went down, and so they had plenty of water in the High Aswan Dam behind the lake, High Aswan Dam. Ethiopia did not turn up. Now, what helped Ethiopia, by dumb luck, it rained a lot extra than what they ever had, so they were able to get the water out. Now, what happens if they come to a multi-year drought coming up? So we need to keep watch on whether or not Ethiopia is going to keep that. The other thing that probably bothers me the most, just because they're distracted, is South Sudan and Sudan. They're the ones that have the canals that come off the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam into the Blue and White Nile to get down to Egypt. And it's not necessarily going to be the Ethiopians that are going to cause the issue. It's going to be the Sudanese. And when they get their act together and they start planting and all those other stuff, that's where the crisis is going to be. It may not be the Ethiopians, but the Ethiopians will be the probably be the ones that get their dam blown up. So, and just because the Sudan decided to do something different. So we try to let people know and try to give them from a short term to a long term the strategic foresight. Is it as bad? Is there opportunities to do transboundary water treaties across the whole different thing? And again, I tell people that if we get water right, we get climate right, because that is the thing of which we feel, gotta have rain for food. Most of these places have dams for hydro and, for energy, health, 4 billion people live in this world of health related disease. When I give these talks, I have somebody time me usually. And then when I'm done, kind of tongue in cheek, but the reality to wake people up. The amount of time that I take every 2 minutes, a child dies by some water related disease. And so if I get up here, and I'm not doing 30 minutes, but if I was doing, that's 15 children that have died somewhere in the world. Like, we need to get our act together on understanding this water issue. And it's climate change is that thing that, again, that we're going to feel it, but water is that constituent that we need to do a much better job of understanding. Okay, current news. We were asked to Tehran, 9.8 million people in Tehran. The mayor said, we need to probably move. And this is way before the current conflict. And Tehran came in and said, the mayor said, hey, we're getting close to day zero. So we looked at, because we find ourselves being mythbusters. Is it really true, or is it just publicity and stuff? So we went and dug into data and all those things. Yes, the reservoirs outside, that there's 5 reservoirs outside of Tehran that supports water. Lots of protests in the region for water security issues that cause that regime to already be somewhat unstable within the Iranian, again, pre-conflict. And so, but you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, they had 5 years of drought. It's really becomes a water resource management issue. But again, if you don't have strategic foresight and you don't understand, causes instability into your country. And again, we've seen it throughout the world where they just don't manage things the appropriate way. They don't want to adapt or mitigate or look at the potential. So every day, people like Penny, we call her our story wrangler. She does the story. We need to translate that data. And so we call the story wranglers within our thing. How can we tell better stories so that we can educate people? So, and these are the 5 lakes. You can see before and after satellite imagery, 2020 and 2025. You can see that multi-year drought that was in the bottom right-hand corner that I was telling you about. That's what the satellite imagery looks like. A lot of these particular reservoirs are near what they call dead pool, which means not enough water to go over the spillways to turn the turbines. So you got a double whammy, you got energy, and a lot of these also do agriculture. So if you don't have enough water to do both, then what are you going to do as a society? And again, generally people stick their head in the sand and that's somebody else's problem. That's what we bring to this fight. I went quickly. I know I was very fast in this, but I wanted to get to some of the questions and other things. But what we try to do is try to help many others to understand how this climate thing, the so what, translate it to me so that I can understand the so what. I mean, okay, greenhouse gas emissions, yada, yada, but everybody's like, so, right? And so every day, what we try to do at the organization, and we're one of the few in the world that do this, to be honest. I'm pretty sure we're one of the few in the United States that do it. Some of the intelligence community does it, but they outsource us to us. and one of the questions up there was India, Pakistan. They're like, can you help us last year in May, this time of year last year, when India said they were going to turn off the spigot. So our story wranglers, Penny, and you can meet her. She's a lot more fascinating than I am. Penny's right there. She put your hand up so I can embarrass you. Ask her lots of questions about how we go about telling the story, how we translate this data so that folks can understand. So Jennifer, I hope I did this right for you and what you wanted to hear out of an organization like ours. But thank you again for listening to me. I know I went very fast. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really love the ability to change and weave hard work into storytelling. We need more of that as a society, obviously, and it's just terrific to hear. And the fact that there is, you know, a certain group of people around the globe, perhaps not that many, but those who are looking to try to make sure that we can end this off the path and really make sure that we know what to anticipate and where the help we need to give so we don't make mistakes. Of course, that operation matters to NATO and our militaries as well. Our final panelist is Professor Elizabeth Jalecki. Sure, if you want to stay here or podium, but we're going to hear a little bit about wargaming, how this is influencing climate. Professor Elizabeth Jalecki is a scholar of international relations whose work explores the intersection of climate change, security, environmental governance. Here, emerging technologies. Her research looks beyond the more familiar language of adaptation and resilience to engage with some of the most complex strategic and political questions raised by the changing climate, including issues of sovereignty, of course, which we all know about here in Canada, geoengineering, global governance. She brings a thoughtful and forward-looking perspective to the discussion, hoping to broaden how we think about climate security and its implications for international.
Thank you very much. And my gratitude to the NATO Association of Canada for having me here. I was a late addition onto the panel, so you guys get to hear about wargaming, whether you want to or not. I have been at the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo for the past 4 months on a technology governance fellowship. And I had a chance recently to talk to Jim Balsillie, the founding donor of the school, about the vision that he saw for the school and what it was that he wanted to do to prepare his students for future careers, how to affect Canada, how to affect the world. And he was very open to all ideas. When I mentioned that I had a climate security war game that I was working on, he said, "Who can I play?" Of course I could play, sure. He wanted to be Canada. I said, no, you have to be the EU. But he was very into it, and he was excited to think that the students that are playing this take these lessons away from them as they go on to build their future careers. So I'm grateful to him for the support of the school and for the support of the fellowship program that I was able to put this game together. I'm going to be taking it to the CCASCOE in 2 days, so they can play in Montreal. So just, yeah, you think you're going to be Canada, but you're not. I'll make you Russia or something. Yeah, all right. So I want to talk to you guys today about strategic foresight in NATO and how gaming can bolster NATO's strategic foresight ability here. So I'm going to talk briefly about why wargaming, what is it, and who uses it, and how do they use it. I'm going to talk about strategic foresight. It is not actually looking into a crystal ball. It is being ready for whatever the crystal ball might show you in the future. I'm going to talk a bit about how NATO uses strategic foresight in their climate analysis, and then the game Climate Arms Race. I might just blow over that today. I was hoping we could play it here today. I could recruit some volunteers out of the audience. Time didn't permit, unfortunately. Okay, but what is a war game? Well, there's various definitions of what a war game might be. If anybody saw the famous eponymous movie from the 1980s with Matthew Broderick, then you know what a war game is. It's when things go really, really, really wrong and you need to stop it really fast. But it's basically any kind of model that is giving you the ability to run the forces, make the decisions, assess the resources in order to determine how decisions are made and how conclusions are formed. And so there's various definitions up here. I'm not all going to read them for you, but everybody uses war games, not just war fighters, not just the military. Businesses use them, emergency management services use them, academics use them. I use them in my classes all the time, scenarios in war games. They basically allow you to fail in a safe way. So you can learn something from the failure. And if I had a good Yoda impression, I would bust out the line about failing being the greatest teacher, but my Yoda is weak, unfortunately. So what types of board games do we have available at our disposal? Now, a seminar board game is a role-playing game. And this is basically where you are assigned a role and you have to be that role for the duration of the game. You have to play that role as though you were that person, you were that country, their interests are your interests. So you can't secretly be rooting for Canada if you were playing the United States, right? Normally they would be on the same team, but that's another lecture. The players are presented with a scenario or vignette, and they have to think through the options available to them. So it's not simply Canada will do this, the Nordic countries will do this, Russia will do this. They have got options and they have to react to this. And based on that, the other players then react to that. So you never know where a seminar game is going to go. A Kriegspiel, on the other hand, is more of a tabletop type game. And there's elements of this as well. And this is where you have a map on the board and you have to move forces around. And you don't know what the future is going to hold. So you again have to be ready to react and make decisions on the fly. Some famous war games you might know include Go, which was invented over 2,500 years ago in China, where you use pieces on a board to encircle your opponent. If anybody's ever played this, you know how this works. Another one you might know would be invented in India in the 7th century AD called Chaturanga, where you have a board with two opposing armies on it. Now you know this game as chess. It started in India. And finally, a matrix game, and this is more simple, a little bit more flexible. It's kind of a hybrid type of game. The term was coined by Chris Engel in 1992, and this is where you have a central moderator who is going to decide the validity of your argument. So if you want to, for example, if you want to be Sudan and you want to knock out the GERD in Ethiopia, then the moderator will determine whether or not your reasoning is valid. So you might be able to do it. Maybe just roll the dice. What's your probability? Is it success? Did you make a good argument? Is this consonant with international law? Does the outside have forces to stop you? All of these questions go into the moderator's weighing the argument, and the game progresses from there. Players can make counter arguments. That one is actually quite a bit of fun. All right. So why do we war game? We game in order to gain understanding of the situational awareness we need in order to prosecute our objectives. We want to practice decision making and appreciate risk. It's very easy to risk things in a game. It's just to roll the dice or a flip of a card. But when you are actually gambling with people's lives and resources, not to mention your potentially your nation's sovereignty, you need to think very carefully about what failure might mean. You might need to exercise your imagination. Mike and I were talking earlier about silos, both in the military and in academia. And people tend to see things through the lens they've always used. But this is where the game allows you to go outside that lens. To understand competition and adversarial thinking. I've gotten some surprising results from scenarios in war games from students who I thought were pretty mild-mannered until all of a sudden they were Russian and then, right? Their inner Putin came out. And finally, to learn from victory and defeat, to fail in a safe way so that you can learn this without actually having to gamble with anybody's lives or anybody's sovereignty. Now, in war game, we talk about internal validity and external validity. What this means is that if the game holds together and you can see the players learning things while they're playing it, it's called internal validity. Can they then take the lessons they learned in the game and apply them to the real world situation? If yes, the game has external validity. And that's what we strive for as game makers. And I want you to watch a trailer of a movie, not the Matthew Broderick movie, but a newer one called War Game. And you'll see the stakes of seminar type war games.
My fellow Americans, it is undeniable that this past election was stolen. To all those members of the armed forces, join with us to defend our liberty and land.
Seated around this room is an incredible diversity of professional experience spanning the last 5 presidential administrations. Most of you have sworn under oath to defend the Constitution. What happens when those in uniform break that oath?
January 6th demonstrated a possible false sense of security.
The next insurrection could involve members of the active duty military. Carry their weapons around on the folks that they are there to protect. One of the recommendations was to war game what that might look like.
I am President Hoffman, Chief Executive of the United States of America.
You have 6 hours to avert a civil war and ensure the peaceful transfer of power.
Mr. President, we're going to be starting the game.
We are here to stress to national security.
One.
I want them to be prepared for the worst case scenarios. I have no idea if at the end of this exercise, this country collapses or comes together. Where we want to send a large body of armed crazies. Yeah, but I'll have.
Are confirming that there are National Guard that have in fact let protesters through.
I'm gonna flood the zone with fake pictures, guys.
I'll find out what is real and what is.
And the reaction. It is not compromising the proceedings of the election.
Yeah, it is compromising the proceedings of the election. The entire Congress is still in a bunker.
We can authorize lethal force.
Officers, is that correct? You could have.
We've done it on the southwest border.
He's gonna have to make a decision.
Pictures.
The states will be on the brink of They've pissed off a lot of senior ranking folks from all 5 presidential administrations. My job. Great job.
Yeah.
Great job. That is their job in this instance. Now you can imagine, had they not gained this out, and this actually happened, would they have been prepared in the slightest? Fortunately, this did not happen. But the lessons learned here are still very valuable, because it might happen in the future. Or if not in Washington, D.C., in a state capital somewhere, or if not in the United States, in another country elsewhere. How do we learn from this? You can stream this on Amazon. I think it's on Apple TV. I didn't get any payback or any kickback from the movie producers. I just thought this was fascinating when I watched it to my students and minds went. So why strategic foresight? Precisely for the reasons because the stakes are that high. We cannot afford to remain in the silos. We cannot afford to remain looking through the same lens that we always look through. Right? We talk about a VUCA world in strategic foresight. Volatility, complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And you cannot predict the future, which is why you need this flexibility in analysis and in realization. There's a certain amount of humility that goes along with strategic foresight. Because 100% of the time in predicting the future, you will in fact be wrong. I'm getting the time sign here, so I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit. This is what's called a futures cone. Some of you might be familiar with this type of slide before. We're here in the now. We only know what we see in this moment and what came behind us. All of that led to this particular point. But the future could go in any number of directions. So we have to bear in mind, what do we want? What might happen? And what sounds completely crazy? What's that preposterous future? That's where strategic foresight comes in such handy. This is put together by a colleague of mine who works with NATO as well. His name is Gabriel Rizzo. He owns a strategic foresight firm, and he calls this the future's horn. And it's interesting that it's different from the future's cone because you cannot see the future from where we are now. There are certain futures we just can't imagine, those preposterous futures. We can never think of it. But that's precisely what we need to think of. In the previous talk I gave, we don't have time for it now, but in the previous talk I gave, we actually perused some of these questions. What if some of these things were to actually come true? Now you might look at this and say, well, none of these are any big deal, but the closer you think about it, how would we actually address this? How would a country like Canada address it? How would its allies address it? NATO as a whole? How would the world grapple with some of these questions? That's where strategic foresight comes in handy. And again, I want to stress, ladies and gentlemen, it is not about predicting the future. It is about being flexible enough to take whatever the future comes and to say that we understand we need to remain humble and strong in facing whatever comes to us. Any useful about the idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous. It's those people who are ridiculous now that are faded later. Now, future of the world order is going to be dealing with all of these questions. Climate change is one of them. But NATO's foresight is looking at all of these issues. I'm waving the climate flag, but there are others waving other flags for these topics. NATO has to address all of it. Okay. Their foresight function is basically looking at all the tools they have at their disposal to meet the potential threats coming, preposterous or not. And they draw on a number of different actors to help them do this. So there's me, academia, but they draw on all sorts of people to help them do this, including the people sitting in this room. If we think NATO is doing a good job, if we think it's doing a bad job, if we think they're unprepared, if we have advice for them, you guys are the ones to give it. If you have a wicked problem, game it out. A very famous gaming professor told me this at one point, and I see now why he said it. Wargaming doesn't always lead to these ridiculous and preposterous futures. But it's useful to NATO, to armed services, to nations, to governments, to universities, to businesses. They need to be ready for whatever future comes their way. No plan survives contact with the enemy, according to Field Marshal Helmuth von Moltke. But as Mike Tyson put it more prosaically, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is not just going to punch NATO in the mouth, it's going to beat it senseless if we don't start thinking of what those preposterous futures might hold. Gaming is one way to do that. And I'll wrap up here with this slide. That figure on the left just frankly pisses me off. We have had multiple years to address this issue, multiple chances, multiple international environmental agreements, multiple changes of government across all of NATO, across all of the world, and we still are increasing carbon dioxide at a record pace. Where does this lead to us? See that Earth over there on the right? That is going to be what the Earth might look like by 2100, possibly as soon as 2080. And that's not that far away from now. The next generation who are sitting in this room, the younger folks, are going to see that. I won't live to see it. You will. Your children definitely will. So look at that Earth right there. Look at how hot it is. Look at where we are. Look at the melting Arctic. All the NATO allies. What kind of world are they going to be facing? When I showed my graduate IR class this, they actually gasped. And one woman said, "Is that world even habitable?" I said, "I don't know. That's a good question because the world has never been as hot while humans have been on it." So if we ever needed strategic foresight and alliance cohesion, the time would be now. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I enjoyed the chance to talk to you.
Yes, spectacular, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. We're now going to go into about 15 to 20 minutes. Prepare questions, and then we'll open it to the floor for everyone in the room. I'd like to start, Christian, just because Elizabeth's presentation was so good at explaining some of the differences between symbolic and what really could be happening, what we have to try to predict. CASCOE has been presented not just as a symbolic addition to NATO's climate agenda, but as a practical platform for research, education, training, and professional exchange. Now, from your perspective, inside the center, what would success look like over the next few years? How do you know when climate security has moved from being acknowledged conceptually to being meaningfully embedded in an alliance thinking plan?
For this question, I would like to start from our mission. So when we start, our main mission was and it still is to fill the gap between science community and military practitioners. How we do that, I will take you in the next few steps. But if we will be able to fill that gap, that will be our successful story. So one of the main issues that we face immediately after we start is that climate security is not a discipline at NATO. So one of the avenues that we are pursuing is to make everything necessary on our side to impose or to make climate security as a discipline within NATO platforms. Then we can move forward by saying that another successful story would be if we will be able to integrate climate security into exercises. If we will be able to be part also on the planning phases, but also to in the operational part to capture all the lesson learned over there and to be able then to take advantage or leverage on those. Then another successful story is to take those lessons learned and move them into or to translate them into the doctrines or NATO doctrines. So far, we see that climate change is not really part of NATO doctrines, even we speak about tactical publications or operational doctrines. Climate change is still treated as a background or a baseline, but most of the time we need to acknowledge that climate change should be part of the planning process and then to be considered further away.
So like gender-based analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good comparison. And one of the last successful story, I see being able to influence the decision makers. Even we speak about procurement, even we speak about future operating capabilities. That is another avenue that we can really move things forward. Thank you.
I'd like to move on to Mike, just to give a bit more of a higher level description of your work at the Global Water Security Center. It's consistently treated water not simply as an environmental issue, but as a strategic variable that shapes stability, infrastructure resilience, and operational capacity more generally. Given how often climate security discussions stay at a high level, where do you think defense institutions still most underestimate water insecurity as a driver of fragility or conflict?
Part of it, again, is that acknowledgement of the so what or the impacts. Time throughout my career and then now outside of the military, they just, they don't really grasp again, that so what, right? Because it's, while everybody's supportive of climate, or most people are, of climate change and all that other stuff, they don't have people that can translate the so what. And when it becomes a little bit more of a difficult concept for them to, yes, they can see the chart that Beth showed, they can see the big red numbers, but what does that big red number mean to them? And that's where it gets lost. And and it's not like these people are intellectual or not. It's just they don't understand what that big red number is. And so we find ourselves a lot of times again trying to tell that story so they can look at the big red number on the chart in Africa. I think it's 7 or 8 in the chart that she showed. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean mega droughts like what we saw? And then use some of the historical antidotes to it. We talk about the Mayans or the Aztecs. Why did the Vikings leave, Scandinavia? It's because they came out of the medieval war period and decided to conquer the world. So, like, put real life things in that story to go, oh, we've kind of maybe seen a little bit of this in the past, and remind them of the history and other things. And then it begins to start to click a little bit better. Got a long ways to go, but it begins to click a little bit better.
So then on to you, Beth, as well. So much of the climate security conversation remains focused on adaptation, infrastructure, and resilience. Your work pushes that discussion toward governance questions specifically around emerging climate and intervention technologies. And so as states begin thinking more seriously about geoengineering, what new security dilemmas do you think policymakers are least prepared for, seeing as we've had so many war games to try to see what that might be?
Yes, it's frustrating. We're getting onto the point of geoengineering now, because mitigation and climate mitigation should be doing is been ignored because it's painful. Or it's expensive, I should say, and adaptation is being done piecemeal because it's painful. So policymakers are jumping straight into technological fix, frankly, after years of saying climate change is still not climate change. But that's going to go now. So we have to start thinking about governing what is potentially a climate changing technology. In fact, it's not climate change. It's not its job. So we have to think about how you govern technology that alliance of nations or partnership or even potentially one nation might be able to manipulate global climate to its benefit. Right? And that might not be a decision every other country will fair enough. I think what they are least prepared for is the idea of several things. First of all, the idea of misinformation. There's a lot of questions around is geoengineering feasible? Is it workable in the time frame that we need? Do we have the ability to do it? And it's ethical questions about do we have a right to do it? Policymakers, as far as I know, have looked at this only cursorily. They've not really worked this into any governance discussions. Another one of the concerns that I think they're not ready for is misattribution. it's easy to say, oh, yes, climate change caused this tornado. But you can't be that granular about it. Likewise, you can't be that granular about my attempts at climate engineering to forestall the tornado or to bring the rain over here and take it away from over there. And so, unless we have some way to determine how this is working over time, misattribution is going to be a real problem because we'll present security concerns between countries. And finally, I think the biggest thing that they're not planning for is they're not questioning the assumption that the future is not going to look like the past. They think it will look like the past. So anything we've done in the future, well, if we've done in the past, we'll just do it again. It is not going to be that simple, ladies and gentlemen. And this will be foresights, wargaming, where we need centers of excellence to address these tricky questions, and centers like Mike's Center to answer the questions that the government asks, so that they are ready when this information comes down.
So I'd love to hear that from both Mike and Christian a little bit down that line, because all three of you work in different ways at the boundary between science and strategy and policy. So let me make a broad question then, especially to the two of you, but Beth, if you want to jump in as well. What is the biggest mistake policymakers still make when trying to translate climate knowledge into security policy? Do they simplify too much, focus too narrowly on fiscal risk, or still fail to appreciate the political consequence? Beth just mentioned that they're looking at mitigation, looking at geoengineering as opposed to just mitigating climate change itself. I'd be interested in both of your thoughts on that.
Okay, I'll start. Throughout my whole career, I'm going to go down one level to the planners first, then have to convince. Throughout my whole career, and Christian probably has had this in his also, when they do war games and exercises, they want you to do can weather or can climate, because weather is hard and interrupts every objective that they're trying to achieve with an exercise or a war game. And so they basically zero out weather because it's hard. And so there's got to be a point that, yes, it is, and you've got to plan for. I mean, you pointed me down to your library, and there's some figurines of Napoleon's Grand Army down there. Why did Napoleon fail as he was going to Russia? It's because of weather, and they froze, but they didn't plan for it. He thought his supply chain was doing just fine and going out there. So we see throughout all of history where they just totally ignore it. And there's got to be some event that has to happen that the planners have to finally acknowledge that this difficult thing does screw up all the time. All the time. Well, but even in war games, it's hard. Let's take it. And I mean, throughout my whole career, we just take it out of war games, and because it screws up the objectives that I'm trying to achieve or to come out.
So Christian, what do you think is the biggest mistake policymakers still make when trying to translate climate knowledge into security policy?
So beside what was mentioned already, I think one of the point is related to the fact that we need to change their mindset in order to think these consumer cycles for indicate, because I mentioned before that major icebreaker acquisitions will be completed by 2030, but those icebreakers will be good enough for the future operating environment in like 20, 30 years. I'm not sure if the politicians or through their chain of command, they were really capturing all the constraints of that kind of things for future operating environment that will face in 20 years from now.
And so just to go on one more step there, your background combines meteorology, climatology, operational analysis, and that gives you a particularly valuable lens, I think, on this issue. When climate is discussed in defense circles, what do you think is most often missed when scientific understanding is not adequately connected to operational planning? And what does your experience working on the case of Romania specifically taught you?
So most of the time we are not learning from our own mistakes. This is and we have all the institutional or all the points to leverage on. Like we have lesson learned we have possibility to update our doctrines, but somehow the the cycle of updating doctrines, they are going beyond how fast the lesson learned cycles are happening. So we end up by repeating our own mistakes with the next reiteration of the next exercise till we be able to really capture those. And on top of that, we have climate change that is really moving very fast pace.
Mike, I'm going to move on to you to ask the Global Water Security Center recently received DoD funding to support analysis of environmental factors affecting politics, security, and infrastructure. When defense institutions say they want actionable climate analysis, what does that actually look like in practice? What kind of information is genuinely useful to planners? What still tends to be bringing too abstract for them and to shape decisions?
So it's nice words on the actual climate analysis, but again, they don't know what they're asking for. And so we spend a lot of time just educating what that means. I mean, they use buzzwords or key phrases a lot to sound like they're part of the cool kids. But in reality, they don't. And it's because of when I was in 06, I didn't have time to understand the science and understand. I didn't have good people advising me to make a decision. Just make the decision as what you can. And so part of that is this education, whether it's academia that Beth and I now represent for others. How do you educate them to what those words really mean?
Like within the bureaucracy.
Within the bureaucracy. Now, I got out of bureaucracy because I was frustrated with the bureaucracy. And now, because I don't, and part of it's what I call the beatings and regrets that I wish I could have done. That now that I have some more of the academic freedoms and stuff, that I can hit them harder and spin it to the operational impacts and all those other things. And that's what's important is using that language so that they understand. If you've been in a planning cell or whatever. And for us, again, when I was in the military, we had these things called placements. And if a general officer only has 30 seconds to a couple minutes, understand the scope. And so all of the work that we do is a one-page placemat so they can consume the information quickly and is sufficiently enough to go through that framework that I was talking about to go, hey, dummy, but this is what climate can do to you if you don't choose not to engage with it. So every day we create these things that are not, I mean, I'm gonna slam the World Bank, and I'm sorry if there's any World Bank people here, but World Bank writes these wonderful reports, their own acknowledgement that they only get downloaded an average of 10 times. So they spend millions of dollars making a very thick document to who needs it. And so it is so important to put it in the language, translate it, and keep it simple enough that they.
So, considering what Christian was mentioning of having some kind of a climate-based analysis being integrated into operational planning, would something like that be appropriate, or some other way of getting the language and the habit of this, climate security implications to get really embedded witin operational?
I would say that would be a wonderful stretch goal to try to. Well, again, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I supported stuff in Christian probably the same way, where I said, hey, you still planning to hit that target? And they're like, why? And I said, can't because of weather. And I mean, literally, I've had things thrown at me, staplers at my head and everything else, because the weather was going to screw up that operation. I'm like, well, if you just added the weather people to the planning, I would help you do it better.
Talk to General Eisenhower.
Right. But they forget those lessons. And again, it's incumbent on people like Christian and myself and many others, CASCOE, how do we break down that silo so that they actually listen with some knowledge to help them work through the issues?
Through a stapler.
It's a 2-star admiral that was pretty upset that the mission wasn't going to happen.
building on what was said, I think also another point is to be able to integrate climate intelligence into our workflow. And if we'll be able to do that at a level that will be satisfied for commanders, and they will be able to understand all the facts that climate intelligence is coming up with, they will assure that mission will be accomplished.
Just a few more questions here, then we'll open it up. Elizabeth, in your talk, we discussed the development of a climate security coordinator for NATO and what gaming can reveal that more conventional modeling or policy analysis misses. Could you expand just a little bit on that for us? What does aiming out to climate security thinking at NATO, especially when institutions are trying to anticipate complex, politically sensitive futures and they don't want to do it?
Yeah, that's frustrating trying to tell somebody something that they don't want to hear. I think what the war game does, what it can do beyond the modeling, the scenarios and so on, the policy analysis, is it introduces the human element. It introduces the element of human decision making, especially under stress. Shut a timer on someone's face and then watch what happens in the decision making process, right? This happens to all of us. We're given, right? We don't have time to think about things. You don't have time. You gotta make a decision right now what you do. So I think that allowing players to experience that stress, try to assimilate as much information as they can, and then succeed or fail. And if they fail, realize what information they didn't have that they should have. That's one way to get them to realize that, no stick or throwing is necessary. You can actually pull this information and then game it out the next time and see, oh, look, we got better results the second time. We got more information. Super, let's do this in the future. And I think that's why it's the human element that policy analysis scenarios or say conventional model policy doesn't involve. You can take the exact same game, play with the exact same people twice, and you will get different results.
All right, just one last question to all three of you. NATO has clearly said climate considerations need to be integrated into the alliance's core tasks. But there's always a difference between institutional recognition and operational transformation. Sometimes it takes decades. What would each of you point to as the clearest sign that militaries are genuinely adapting, not just speaking differently, but planning, operating differently? Either of you want to go first. Any particular signs that you see that the shift is taking place? There must be some good news stories. I mean, for me, it's fascinating the amount that we have heard from different military individuals, usually the colonel level, who are always talking about the usefulness of being able to adapt to climate change in their operation plan. They seem to genuinely at the lower level really kind of embrace that. And I personally have been very impressed with seeing the Canadian militaries understand. Obviously, you have the Arctic, so there is a significant amount of that happens at every single operation in Milk, which we have every single year, and realize our limitations because you cannot ignore the weather in the Arctic. But I'd be interested in any other.
Well, I'm not going to have I ever been in military, so of course I'll go first to answer this question. I think the establishment of CCASCOE is one of the great steps forward in terms of dealing with the effects of climate change on military operations, but also on NATO itself. So that is a promising step in the right direction. If anybody saw it this morning or yesterday or whatever, the New York Times did an article on U.S. soldiers from the southern U.S. who are not used to the cold, who were transplanted up to the Arctic with the Canadian team to try to operate up there. And they were freezing. I'm sorry, they weren't ready. They were cold all the time. They were whining about it. So I said, "Yeah, shut up, this." And the article came out and said that the Canadians are much more methodical about this. They're used to this kind of Canadian approach in this instance better. So I think the fact that U.S. military is from what I've heard, is slowly picking this up. That's a step in the right direction. You don't shift institutions that big that fast. I think the fact that the CCASCOE was able to launch new programs, this is going to have ripple effects about all the militaries in medicine.
Building on that, also, I would like to mention some aspects of our activities. So, as I mentioned, we next week will start our climate security basic course, and we also try to receive more applicants than the available seats. So we had triage, which means there are more and more people interested in that. So and also we didn't make available like 10 seats or something. We had 35 and we received around 50 applicants over there. Also another success is that going through the last two editions of Montreal Climate Change and Security, we saw that people are getting each edition more and more.
This is the conference.
Yeah, the conference, yeah. And again, this is another good sign that we see along the way. And also another one is that when we look into all the activities that are happening at NATO HQ, we are part of those, or at least they are asking us to be part of those. And I want to mention just the climate change and security task force. We are part of that one, and we contribute to different documents that community is putting together.
Apart from staplers being thrown.
But apart from that, we do see a lot of requests for information that comes. And I think there is this thirst for knowledge, but sometimes I just don't know how to get the shape that question, per se. I think the other thing too, and I know this is going to sound somewhat funny, but we're not seeing pushbacks. I know that I live in a glass house where people can criticize the analysis that we accomplish to provide the strategic foresight and methods mentioned. But I don't really get a lot of criticism coming back. And you would think that from any side, doesn't matter your political persuasion. I didn't emphasize this enough, or I didn't say that. But we don't really see that much of the rocks thrown at our glass house. And so that sounds kind of funny in that but a lot of people love to be critical about anything, right?
Especially something that's new.
Right. And so we don't see that a lot of criticism of what we do. And so I see that as a positive. Again, it's a little bit of a wonky allegory to it a little bit, but that's very positive that there is this thirst for knowledge with doing stuff like that that Christian and CCASCOE and many others are doing. It's just going to take some time.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, it is a community effort. I think most of us all live in a world where the climate security and climate emergency have been talked about for the past decade, and that is not without significant impact in our psyche, our everyday life, what we think about, what we consider, and institutional change is necessary, clearly, in every walk of life. And it is heartening to see after a beat, you are all able to pluck out something that does show some positive indicators that we are changing, that our militaries are changing. But I would just mention that for NATO itself, I would really like to remind you all, it is a tremendous center of gravity for change. We have what are called the standard operating procedures. We have obviously handbooks, handbook upon handbook, workshop upon workshop. And this constantly, does change things. It is something where NATO is a large institution, but it can course correct. And so I'm thrilled to see this kind of change. Wonderful to see what COE is doing. And I'm so glad that you here are able to hear a little bit about it and meet some of the principal individuals involved. So with that, I hope you do have some questions. We've got two of our two outstanding intern team with mics. So I think we've got two right here. The mics will come to you up third. And again, if you can please try to make your question in the form of question and allow our fabulous panel to engage with.
All right, thank you so much. My name is MD. I run an organization called Technocracy AI. So it's about augmented democracy. So this panel reminds me of the historical Canada Dry 1 and Canada Dry 2. So when they were deployed in Qatar, Doha, the human decision maker was the director for that deployment, was saying the boys would have to march towards the desert for 10 kilometers and somebody was disputing they might die. So that brings me to the understanding of human in the loop in terms of decision making, in terms of warfare, wargaming, agentic AI, non-human identities, and how we govern them, and how the future of warfare and climate security would shape, and adoption of these kind of modern technologies like Planeteer in terms of NATO and any other allies, and how we can govern them. And human decision making is gonna change, and it has to change, and how humans stay in the loop on top of the decision making for this kind of agentic systems.
Anybody on the panel like to address?
I just want to be able to pull the question out of what you said. We're asking the panel how we would govern technologies like AI.
So basically, when you are talking about agentic AI for wargame and warfare, so energy does come into play, and agentic AIs can independently take decisions. Like let's say Planeteer has the kill chain, so where they allocate the resources based on that AI's decision, where human decision makers are not taking that much of involvement, and it will have the resource allocation maintained based on the AI's outcomes, what they predict. So how NATO adoption of that and the energy crisis that are happening, which will obviously let other countries to adopt these kind of technologies, and how we would be able to mitigate that factor, like human in the loop or the agentic AIs.
How do
So
we keep the human in the loop?
yeah, and I mean, this decision making process will be always first AI and then come to humans when the larger adoption happens. How we govern that transition?
This is going to be very difficult. I will take a crack at it here, but I think the thing that the humans are providing, that the AIs are not providing, are values. And we can certainly use AI to tell us an efficient way to get from point A to point B, or what might be the optimal outcomes in a particular game or situation. But it's only optimal because the values we programmed into it in the beginning. So if we want to maintain ecosystem coherence, for example, if we want to maintain a governance structure like democracy, if we want to maintain international law norms like human rights, environmental protection, the AI doesn't think of those. We think of those. We want those. We put them in, and then the AI can direct us to either maintain it or destroy it. So I don't see the AIs replacing the human in that. If we are letting the AI do all the work, then we've just written ourselves out of the equation. It's not us now to do that.
I'd like to try to get all the questions first, and then perhaps we have Tamara Wills here just in the middle.
Thank you very much for this workshop. My name is Tamara Lawrence. I'm also a PhD student at Balsillie School of International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University. And I have a question for Colonel Grendelin. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, saying in 2 speeches that the U.S. military is not in the business of regulating the global temperature. On climate change, it is done with that expletive, and that the priority for the U.S. military is warfighting. There's no doubt that this impacts on NATO and climate change. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask is, are you aware? Well, I was at the climate summit in Egypt in 2022, and I listened to the leaders' plenary, where the Libyan president said in his speech that since the NATO bombing of Libya in 2011, that Libya was no longer able to really deal with the climate crisis because NATO had bombed critical water infrastructure in that country, the Great Man-Made River and the Brega Pipeline. So I'm wondering if you're aware of that, and the concern that many Africans have about NATO's real commitment to climate change and their development. Thank you.
Is this Chatham House rules? Because I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. How?
Chat with me afterwards. The reason I'm hesitant is because I get DoD funding, and this is not Chatham House. Just talk to me. Thank you. Sorry. I do have an opinion, but not without Chatham House rules.
No. And sorry, apologies for that. We do have some questions out here, but I would say as well, I mean, NATO is always going to have different countries that have different policies, and those policies are going to change. The hope, I think, for us is that NATO will be able to help be a ballast for some of the visions of what we have as an alliance, some of the different strictures that we agree to, and to what we find as a threat. Certainly, what I've seen in the U.S. We do not receive DoD funding, so we don't have to worry about it. But we've had so many senior generals, the Pentagon itself, recognize climate change as a significant threat. So though there may be some disagreement between the political and the military levels, at least we do have that certain center of recognizing climate change as a threat and something that needs to be planned with in full.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, please join me in giving a big round of applause for our distinguished speakers. Thank you so much, Robert, for organizing this important event. At this time, it's very important. My name is Dost with NATO Association of Canada. And thank you so much, Alishma, for your great work. Despite being a professional boxer and beginning to change my career to become a climate change analyst because I'm impressed by the outstanding professional career achievements of each and single one of you. Thank you so much for that. Dear Elizabeth, wargaming is very important. However, climate is not only going to punch NATO, it is going to punch the solar system because sun is getting old, and one of the external important factor of the planet Earth's rising of the temperature is the sun itself. And one of the important internal factor of the climate change is conversion of the human physical infrastructure to digital for the past 2.5 decades. I mean, for the past 2.5 century. That being said, thank you so much, Mike, on your adversaries regarding climate science to climate.
All right, Toast, is there a question?
Yes. What is the one lesson each distinguished speakers learned from their professional journey, and what advice for young generation you can give us so we can continue that? Thank you.
So many lessons learned for the next generation, successors.
I also learn to be translators. I mean, you need the scientists, but scientists talk with equations and big words and all that stuff, and they don't understand, they don't know how to articulate. I think the single most important is how to communicate and translate that data and that stuff. But otherwise, you're just going to lose. And that's where we're at today, is that we have a lack of translators out there. So learn how to communicate. Like, get off of these stupid things and sit down and communicate across from one another and learn how to translate all that needs to be said, and then just keep living.
Yeah, I would like to add some bit too. So, most in the recent years, all the discussions were around awareness. Everybody's work awareness and concern, but there was little things done around adaptation. So, I think what my advice would be is that let's start conveying less and let's act. And adaptation is one thing that we should put our efforts into because there are solutions out there, but we need to address them and we need to make them or to raise them to the decision makers in order to put them in place.
That's a perfect segue into what I would tell you. Translate, yes, act more, yes, and above all, don't give up. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Do not give up, ever.
Well done. I think we've got a question here and then one in the front. Oh, we've got two over here, one over here, and another in the back. I'm so sorry. Let's try to make the questions as concise as possible so that everybody can get a chance.
I'll do my best, Robert. Thank you. My name is Justin. I'm with the association as well.
My question is for the gentleman from the great state of Alabama. I noticed you used the phrase, Department of War. No judgment. But that certainly suggests the political climate at the moment, that it is an era of populism, and that's a transnational phenomenon, and populism has not been particularly conducive to managing the climate crisis. So I'm wondering if in your line of work, you can imagine any tactics or measures that can be taken to engage the sort of more populist political fractions of Western democracies to take climate mitigation seriously, and to perhaps implement policies that would be constructive in regards to that. If you could address that political dimension in particular. Thank you.
Every day, the stuff that we do is, again, I keep saying this so long, right? I mean, they want to hear what the impacts are. Tell me about the food insecurity. Tell me, this last February, Russia decided to stop exporting grain. And again, no commentary on the Ukraine and the bread basket. They said, hey, I need to hold back. We're walking into an El Nino. India has walked off the world from the program because I'm not saying they're going to do it this time, but we need to look at it. If the El Nino is going to decimate their rice crops, they're going to hold back. And so, like, every day we put it into the frames of, again, that's why I'm going to go to the Water Security Center. It's because we put it in the frame of what the impacts are. And water and food and energy is the daily things that, again, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the food and the water, we put it in those terms. And then we kind of, everything else just kind of falls apart, and all those arguments and all the different things. And so that's how we concentrate on it, is putting it into those impacts so that so they can really, again, understand this, whether it's a 2-degree sea world or a 3-degree. Yeah, we can tell you the magnitudes, but you're still going to have food insecurity issues throughout the world. So it's trying to do, that's how we get around not judging with the politics. It's just saying Sudan's going to go under another crisis, Ethiopia, Southeast Asia, with an El Nino, Southeast Asia's grain exports are going to plummet. So what does that mean for food security issues in this upcoming fall and into the winter? And they're like, then I don't say anything about it. I think we've got another question.
Thank you to the panel. My name is King. I'm a student at the Mum School, University of Toronto. Just think that's that way. Climate change by its very nature is very slow. I mean, but it has immense ripple effects and implications. So in terms of military exercises, doesn't climate change shape the theater, but it doesn't really feed into operational planning. I'm certain that the Russians and the Ukrainians aren't really thinking about the climate at this time. Now, that's not to say that's not important. It's very important. And so could the panel expand on how NATO and the CCASCOE Center and yourselves be placed appropriately, find the appropriate place to insert policy recommendations furthering climate mitigation goals? And another aside, could funding towards the national security frame of climate change mitigation fall under NATO spending, perhaps that 1.5% of infrastructure?
That last bit is always an interesting aspect. Anybody want to?
I can address the first part of the first question. And I will start by giving you an example. Cold response just ended last month, and one of the lessons learned from there was that they need to move the exercise from March, April to January, February, because of the weather. They got a lot of rains, and also all the ice flows that they were leveraging on for the previous exercises, they were no longer existing anymore. So we all acknowledge that climate change is a slow onset, but things are happening, and we need to integrate that into our doctrine. And the problem with the lesson learned is that, like I said before, they are there, but because the updating cycle of the doctrines is going on 4 to 6 year cycle, those are not captured. So next year exercise or next year trainings are following or are going into the same issues because those were not captured over there. So the problem is that as we see from CASCOE is that we need to act faster to integrate those lessons learned. Even climate change is a slow onset factor.
Other thoughts? For the 1.5%, as far as defense infrastructure is concerned, I would mention that there are countries that are looking at that. Certainly Canada's, all of our defense investment in the Arctic, there is a significant angle to that. I would say though, one of our directors, John Curtin, would like to say that we're just in front of it.
Professor Curtin from the University of Toronto, and my question is to Beth, and it's about war games.
Oh, boy.
Are there war games where the uniform military in Team B plays not against a uniform military in another team, but against nature and its extreme weather events, floods, tornadoes, my favorite, wildfires? I think in Canada, part of it is what we call aid to the civil power, but aid to nature too, to protect nature against the extreme weather events.
Your favorite is wildfires, John? Jesus. Long time no see, but I don't know of any war games where you have the war fighters fighting nature. Nature is the unbeatable opponent. Not that I like to characterize nature as the enemy, but nature dominates the upper rings of the escalatory ladder, so we don't have any way to beat nature. Yes, we certainly have scenarios and emergency planning where we try to deal with the floods, wildfires, that sort of thing. But that's not really a war game. Now, if there are war games where you have armed forces of state B or state A fighting nature, then I would love to hear about it because I bet it's not a real war game. But in that case, the decision making could be equally as valuable because you're faced with escalating climate disasters. How do you respond to those? Do you mitigate? Do you adapt? Do you try to engineer something? What do you do? And if you don't have the money to do it, then where do you go get it? What are your contingency plans? And that's where the strategic foresight aspect of wargaming comes in such handy, because you have to realize that at some point the United States might have to, start buying submarines from Canada. Maybe they're buying submarines from South Korea. Maybe they go to Russia for help, paying attention to what's going on in the Arctic. That's stuff they have to game out. Strategic foresight allows us to think of ways to do that.
Terrific. Oh, we have Catherine Lindsay Hooper, Honorary Chair Emerita, and then Di Johnson, and another individual here on the left as well, on the right as well.
I'm so proud of my team. I'm just so proud of all our interns and members and the directors who are here. I just cannot tell you. I'm going to go back to the simple part when you said we need translators. We had a seminar on drones in Ottawa in November. We had 3 panelists from each of the different sets of our Canadian forces. I never heard more algorithms in my life. I got up at the end of this to them. I think you need to have a vocabulary that you hand out. And I thought what you said is absolutely true. We need words translated that people can understand. So that and I think we need to do that. And we need to have a dictionary around this whole principle. And why can't we create that?
I believe we have Di Johnson and a couple of others just over here.
Thank you to everyone for such an enlightening talk. This question can be for everybody, but mainly for Colonel Grimillion. Sorry, I know you're sick of all the direct questions to you now. We've had a lot of talk about very useful and very correct analyses of policy, but I want to hear more about the beast. I want to hear more about the bureaucracy of it all, because this is all grand and great ideas, but what's a realistic timeline of proposal, scrutiny, research, writing, implementation? These things can take years, decades even. So if we're setting goals that we want to try and start doing by the 2030s, what's the likelihood that these things can actually start, greasing the wheels by these proposed timelines? And if so, are any of these great goals that we want to see implemented actually even possible by the time we want to even see them be started? Thank you.
So the beauty of the center that I created is to work on real life events today. So in the United States, national labs, you give them a problem, it takes a year and a half, and then they may come back. And by the time they come out with an answer on the other end, the event's already occurred, and now it becomes a lesson learned, right? Maybe. And so what we try to do is, for instance, I'll pick something in the Biden administration and then the current administration. We were asked by the National Security Council, will El Nino affect the humanitarian crisis after October 7th in Gaza? And so, and everything that we do, we either do it within a 2-week cycle or a 4-week cycle. So it's really quick. So we can do events that are occurring right now and give you an answer for planners and how they operate. Not, hey, we're going to study, we're an academic and we're going to just go out and study it. That way it begins to, the quicker that we can get this information into the policymakers and the decision makers, they may or may not use it, but at least we continue to broadcast and educate. And they're like, oh, we need to reconsider the current term. In AFRICOM, they were doing a country engagement in Benin, and they wanted to know what the future of Benin's cotton industry would look like from a drought and heat and all those other things. Because the president and everybody else that runs the country controls the cotton, controls the transportation, controls everything. So what would a future of Benin look like if that stayed and above 35 degrees C, cotton yields begin to decrease? So how many more days of dryness, how many more days of above 35 degrees C that we will see? And we gave that, and they went in and did a country engagement into Benin and said, hey, we're looking at this, what your future could play out if 35C became a lot more normal. And it was a lot of good engagements from a strategic, and it was able, the planners and the teams were able to sit down and have a common conversation around climate, what the futures would look like. And then it opened the doors because they wanted to hear from it, the Benin military in particular, and the US military. And so it opened those doors for conversations that if a center like ours that did do some kind of a quick analysis on the back of the envelope to help them understand what future cotton yields would look like, it would be something that was not there. So it's just repeated, as I think as Christian says, we just can't know about better. We just kind of continue to do it, and we do.
We have Rowan and Jane, and then I think we'll draw things to a close. Okay, 2 more questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Rosemary Clark, I'm the Servicemen Salute, a veteran of Canadian Forces. Thank you very much, everybody, for having us. The question that I have, and it parallels the point about weather, which, well, we won't deal with weather. We talk about the frameworks, particularly around instability. What I would wonder and ask is if you have built in civil unrest and the counter being civil society. When I look at Canada, we don't have that well sourced in terms of emergency management. We have emergency responders, but they get tired. They will be exhausted. Have you built into your modeling, and I like the war game where you've got citizens revolting as the example, when we talk about actors in the model that we can see in terms of communication, have you built in not assume that civil society isn't a player right now in these plans, and that civil unrest is to be expected.
Yeah, we've gained in civil unrest, in some of the board games. I don't have it explicitly as a separate factor in the one I'm developing now, but it's the problem is, and this gets back to the zero it out problem, it's very difficult to model because you can hypothesize that civil unrest might come about because of a certain confluence of conditions, high temperature, low food, low government responsiveness, and so on. But it's difficult to know how long it's going to maintain and what kind of fallout comes out of civil unrest. Are you talking about, serious style fallout? Or are you talking about January 6th style fallout? Or are you talking about just protests in the streets kind of fallout, like by Wall Street? So it's certainly impossible to put it in there, but you have to make it very clear to the game players that you're making assumptions about what civil unrest would look like, and consequently bounding the possible paths the game could take. So it's doable. It's just it's not unlimited. It's not doable in an unlimited way. You have to sort of say, but this could happen, and that can happen, while still recognizing that you're not representing everything that needs to be represented. Otherwise, the game would go on forever.
Great. Do we have a last question? Go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to bring the conversation, I guess, to a slightly different area, and that's the conception of law and industrial policy, because we have these great ideas, but until we actually implement them and until they become executable, we don't have we're not able to build at scale, because this seems to be the biggest problem. We need clean technologies, we need clean energy, we need transition, but unless we build at scale, that's never really going to happen. So I guess on a particular federal level, I'm not putting into provincial federal relations here, but I guess what do you see, given your experience, the biggest regulatory barriers to scaling and commercializing clean technologies, especially because they're used for dual use infrastructure? And how do you see the military and research communities acting as front-faced advocates and more actively in the 21st century to ensure that the private and public sectors are actively integrating climate science, economic resiliency, technological advancements, and wargaming and more into their decision-making, regulatory decision-making, et cetera?
Points at all? I do have a comment, but I've been talking a lot, so
So
I would like to ask a police question, but it falls outside my expertise as is going on.
and the Canadian particular. So,
The problem is that we had that also.
so sorry, sir. We're only taking answers from your panel, but thank you, and then we'll definitely have more discussion afterwards. I would like to say, first of all, Mathieu, would you like to make any final remarks at all? More than welcome. Covered it, but they've covered it all. Oh yes, of course, please. Yeah, that's sum up for sure.
Thank you. So I would like to add one final comment to this meeting, and because as you know, CASCOE has 12 sponsor nations, and because I'm one of the speaking about the people in the room, I'm one of the fewest international expats here. I would like to express on behalf of those 11 sponsoring nations of CASCOE, big thank for Canada that Canada took the lead on this journey. We face some challenges along the way, but we are on a good track. And also thanks to NATO, who is leading this one. We are very grateful for Canada and all the effort that is behind this.
More generally, I'd love to say, bravo to that. But Christian, Mike, that they're just people. You are part of this as well. We are a large society, a great and deep society. There's a lot of room for civil discourse, discussion, questions. NATO is a big tent. If you have a challenge or something to the organization, join us. join the NATO Association, pay attention. We're really looking at how to make society better. And I really would say that the rules-based international order is under a tremendous amount of pressure at the moment. Parts of it are falling away before our eyes, while others are going to have to be strengthened. And NATO is clearly one of those elements. And I really hope that everybody here understands the value of NATO to Canada, understands the urgency of maintaining our security, but maintaining our humanity, our ability to keep these things sacred through personal relationship. It's all about talking to those who are in your friends, your family groups. It's going to be the difference for some people to keep this on the radar. So I really appreciate you coming here today. Please do keep security on your lips. Make sure people realize it is at the end of the day what maintains what we have. And NATO is one of the best indicators I've seen and articulations I've seen of the ability of human relationships to be able to make real definable change. Since its founding in 1949, along with the UN and so many other multilateral organizations, we have been able to develop these absolutely miraculous problem-solving tools that the rules-based order has helped to develop over the past years. Bretton Woods organizations, NATO, the UN, the ICC, the ICJ, so many of these aspects of our greater aspirations. And despite all of the challenges that we see beset before us, we have to maintain that thousand-yard stare to what we're looking for in the future, 50 years, 100 years from now. And that's what the rules-based order helps to give us, that guiding star to which we can course correct from here and from there, where we can really find that just society that was envisioned after the death and destruction of the Second World War. So thank you all again for coming. Thank you so much to the Center of Excellence and all the work that's gone into this, our fabulous panelists, and to you and to your great questions. We now have a reception downstairs, which I know everybody will cheer at. It's supposed to technically start in 20 minutes, but I'm sure we can go down one floor and there will be some refreshments for us and much more discussion. Stay involved. Perhaps become a member of the NATO Association, but no matter what, be part of the conversation. Thank you so much. Sir.
Yeah. My fourth year, it's all exciting. Yeah.
If I could ask all of the NATO Association team to come forward, I'd like to get a photo.
Oh, sounds good.
I was here.